evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dr. William Lester, and I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining me here at my desk. This is episode 2 in our new series, and tonight I want to talk with you about something that's been of interest to me for many years, and that is comic book superheroes. Now, I know that that's kind of a far-flung, far-reaching, all-encompassing subject area, but I thought maybe we would start with with one small specific area, and then maybe in future episodes kind of branch out and talk about some other things. Well, first things first. There are two very large companies that share about 80% of the comic book market. Those companies are Marvel Comics and DC Comics. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about DC, and we'll get as far as we can get, time permitting. Well, DC Comics was founded in 1934 as National Allied Publications, okay? And they basically had three major titles. Had several other minor titles, but three major titles: New Comics, Action Comics, and Detective Comics. Okay. So here's what happened. In 1938, Action Comics introduced a new superhero. We all know him as Superman, faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. We all know the lore. Obviously a tremendous success, and here we are all these years later, and obviously Superman is a fixture in pop culture. The following year, 1939, they introduced another superhero in their other title, Detective Comics, and this was a different character because he didn't have superpowers, but he was the world's greatest detective, and he was called Batman. Like Superman, Batman, of course, is a cultural icon and has existed in several manifestations, from the comic books in the 30s, 40s, and 50s to, of course, Adam West's portrayal in the 1960s TV series, and just a wagon train of movies since the 80s. And so Batman is kind of a charter member in the DC stable of characters. Now, in 1940, several other characters were introduced that went on to kind of become staples in the DC universe and still are today. And some of the names might not be readily recognizable to a lot of people, but for comic book fans like me, well, we know who they are, but you've heard of some of them too. First of all, 1940, Green Lantern, Hawkman, The Flash, and Dr. Fate. Now, I think of all of those, most of you might be aware of who Green Lantern is, and you might be aware of who Flash is, the fastest man alive. Hawkman and Dr. Fate are somewhat more obscure characters, but interesting nonetheless. And if you don't know who they are, I advise you to just do a little quick Google search and just read up on it if you're interested, and maybe like me, you'll find it fascinating. The following year, the same thing happened. 1941, another little group of characters was introduced. Again, these characters went on to become staples in the DC pantheon of heroes. Wonder Woman, who most people today identify with the Linda Carter portrayal in the 1970s series, and it's kind of like, you know, when you think of Linda Carter, you immediately say Wonder Woman. Well, that's because you know, she kind of put her stamp on the character, and in a lot of ways was very true to the comic book representation. Aquaman, that same year, 1941, King of the Seven Seas. I think a lot of people are kind of familiar with Aquaman. Then we had Green Arrow and Dr. Midnight. And of course, Green Arrow was the the expert bowman, the Emerald Archer, and then Dr. Midnight, who I think is a much more obscure character, and many of you may not be familiar with. But again, if you're interested at all, just Google it and find out more about that character and some of the others. Anyway, these characters, beginning with Superman, kind of became the nucleus of the DC universe. By the way, we call it DC Comics because it's taken from the name Detective Comics. Okay, and it's kind of stayed with us all through the years, and so the company simply became DC Comics based on one of its 3 early titles. But these characters became the nucleus of DC Comics, and there was created a group where all of these characters would come together and fight against evil and work in the name of justice. In fact, it was called, guess what? The Justice League of America. Okay. Now, the Justice League of America has had many members coming and going over the years, throughout the decades, but most of these early characters have been mainstay characters. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, The Flash, even Hawkman and Green Arrow are regularly represented in Justice League lore. And there have been dozens of other characters who've kind of moved through the halls of justice, if you will. There in the 70s, Hanna-Barbera did a show, an animated show called the Super Friends, and this was kind of a very lightweight version of the Justice League. And of course, at the time, it was really all we had except for the comic books. And it was an opportunity to see a lot of these characters, you know, on camera, on television, interacting with some of the known supervillains of the DC universe. The Joker, Captain Cold, Solomon Grundy, Lex Luthor, and on and on and on. Because obviously DC Comics has a stable of bad guys and evildoers, just like they have heroes. Recently, and I'm not sure exactly what year it started. I think it was in 1989 or 1990. But DC Comics, which by that point was affiliated with Warner Brothers, started producing animated programs of a high caliber, which really went deep into the DC lore. The first one was Batman the Animated Series. Then they followed that up with Superman the Animated Series, and those kind of overlapped in the 90s. Then they moved into Justice League, which was an animated series, and of course it kind of piled on, and it brought in all these characters, Flash and Green Lantern, etc. And then from there they went to Justice League Unlimited, which kind of let the roof fall in and just used dozens and dozens of characters in the DC universe. So all of this is part of our discussion on superheroes. Tonight we have started kind of looking at the tip of the iceberg in the DC universe. And like I said, in future episodes we'll go a little bit further into DC and kind of, you know, maybe break some things down specifically, maybe some TV shows, maybe some movies, what have you. And then in other episodes we'll get into Marvel, because they have a legendary story all on their own. So I, of course, am your host, Dr. William Lester, and I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me here at my desk.